Now, I would like to go with our main speaker, our keynote speaker, RonKim, a long-time resident of Flushing, Queens, was re-elected to his third term as the representative of the 40th Assembly District in November 2016. He is the first and only Korean American ever elected to the New York State Legislature. After spending his adult life in public service, Ron is committed to delivering real results for the community he has called home since the age of 7. In his career in public service, Assemblymember Kim has worked for New York City Council member John Liu, New York City's first Asian Council member, Assemblymember David Webrin, New York City Council Speaker Christine Quinn, and Governor Elliot Spitzer and David Patterson. Assemblymember Kim will discuss his efforts to create the New York State Asian American Legislative Task Force. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome Assemblymember Ron Kim for today's presentation with a big round of applause.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
First and foremost, let me thank HP and also, more importantly, HP's wife, Mrs. Wang, for waking up at 5 in the morning to make the best dish every year. That's the real reason why I come back every year. But I always wanted to do this at an event. I always wanted to open up my speech by saying, "Will the real Ron Kim please stand up?" No, but all joking aside, we're joined by Ron. He used to go by Ronald. Now he goes by Ron. But a long time ago, when I ran for office, a quick story, I had another Ron Kim from California who reached out to me, who was working for one of the top McKinsey consulting firms, and said, someone just reached out to me and made a donation. Wants to make a donation to me. I have no idea. And I looked your name up, and you're running for office. And that guy who I never met before actually made a contribution all the way from California, just reading up on my stories. So just to piggyback on the importance of contributing to political campaigns, it is very difficult when you're in politics to raise money. And I think no politician enjoys raising money, but it is absolutely critical for us to give communities like these a voice that we need by doing the necessary work to be in a viable position to get to the next office. So just thank you for recognizing the importance of political contributions. Yesterday morning I was down in Queens in my district. It was like 8 o'clock in the morning, and I had a private meeting with some of my supporters. Maybe 4 or 5 of us. We had breakfast. I haven't seen them in a while. These are all first-generation Asian Americans, small business owners, and one of them, toward the end of the breakfast, he's old enough. He's around my dad's age, and he was saying, my son, he's just struggling. I don't know. I look at him and I feel bad for him because he doesn't know where he belongs. We don't talk about it, but I can sense that he doesn't know if he's American or he doesn't know if he's Korean. And he's constantly trying to figure out, where he belongs in this society. Like, it was a very profound statement by this gentleman, and I told him, it's interesting because even myself, every single day, I deal with my identity as an elected official, serving in Albany as an Asian American. And I think as Asian Americans, we are at a unique time in history where we need to have more uncomfortable conversations. And that's my main message to the group today, that we should embrace uncomfortable conversations at home, at school, wherever the opportunity may arise, and especially in events like these, in our pop-ups events. Because we are a rising minority group, we haven't figured out exactly as a community politically and civic-wise, where do we actually fit in? And these are some uncomfortable conversations in dealing with race relations. Are we aligned with the struggles and the plight of the Black and Hispanic communities that came before us and laid out the groundwork for civil rights movement? Or are we with the white community that are part of the majority still in this country? You know, these are uncomfortable conversations that Asian Americans should be having and must be having with our children. And it starts at the very local level. And for me, I remember, you know, I have two young daughters, Olive and Hazel. She's 3 and 1 years old. And I remember my wife told me, you know, let me backtrack. I didn't used to do this, but every time I'm home, every chance I have an opportunity at home, I do the dishes and I do all the chores. I wasn't always like that. You know, I hated doing the dishes. And it took my wife to have a very uncomfortable conversation with me to get to this point. Because my wife noticed that, and I didn't even look at this, when my parents come over, or when we're over at my parents', my dad would never get up after dinner to do the dishes. And this is the way that many Asian Americans and Korean Americans and Chinese Americans, many Asian Americans function. It's a very male-dominated family. And my mom would insist, like, no, I'm gonna cook, I'm gonna do dishes, and he would never let me get, even myself would help, like, just, this is what I'm gonna do for you, right? But my wife reminded me, I don't want my two daughters to grow up in an environment where they feel pigeonholed or think that as a woman, your job is to do the dishes, or you're only limited to doing certain things. And it matters what you see in the household. And that, you know, initially when she gave me some critical feedback, of course, when you criticize my family, you know, it doesn't matter if it's my wife, I'm a mama's boy, right? So like, well, why are you insulting my parents? You know? So initially, I feel a little anger toward that. But once I processed it, I realized there's plenty of opportunities, even as Asian Americans and Asians, to improve. And those are the uncomfortable conversations that we should be having every single day, especially with our next generation. Because there's nothing more important than making sure that we are training and preparing our next generation for positions of leadership. And the biggest challenge, and I'm going to close with this, I know we have other wonderful speakers, for Asian Americans and Asians, in my opinion, that we're still, and I mentioned this last year briefly, and I just want to still focus on this a little bit, that we're still very much driven to an extent by validation, wanting to feel validated and fit in assimilate. We want that, we want to dangle as many carrots in front of our kids so they can go and feel validated all the time. And that's kind of the way that we're trying to externally motivate our youth to get to point B. But I'm telling you right now, in order for our next generation to truly become leaders, whether you're an engineer or whether you're whatever field you're pursuing and being in positions of power and influence, we need to give them a sense of deep purpose. We need to make sure that they feel passionate about whatever they're doing, and externally motivating them and making them driven by validation is not going to get them there. And that's part of, I think, our biggest challenge as Asian Americans. And I'm just talking from my own personal experience in my district, but I think it does resonate because I've been traveling quite a bit and seeing different communities around the world. And it doesn't matter which Asian country you're from, it seems like there is a common theme here, where we're constantly trying to externally motivate our kids. So I think the reason why I continue to come here and support Papa is it's organizations like these that can have these uncomfortable conversations and really focus on how do we create a pipeline of real leadership in the next generation. So I applaud you for your efforts. I know we have wonderful speakers today.
You want to mention the task force?
Oh, sure. Yeah, the real reason I'm here. Yes. Thank you, HP.
I remember last year,
Yeah.
you know, that you put a piece of paper in front of the caucus.
That's right.
I
Yeah.
feel I'm very uncomfortable with that.
Yeah. So we, speaking of creating a pipeline, we were able to successfully create an APA task force, of the first and only funded government body to focus on policies and budget items impacting Asian Americans throughout the state of New York. Originally, it was a caucus, but unfortunately, we still don't have an Asian American in the state senate. So they protested. It can't be a caucus if it's only members in the assembly. So we're calling it a task force now, but it's the same mission with members who have 15% or more Asian Americans in the district. So we actually have 20 plus members as part of the task force. We're still looking at interviewing executive directors, an executive director position for this task force. So please, if you have no resumes, I think we have 2 or 3 more weeks of interviewing. So if you have some young people that want to apply for that position, we'd love to review it. The goal of this task force is that after me and Ron and other leaders, we do our public service and lead. We want there to be a sustainable voice, no matter who the Asian American political leaders are, that continue to focus on Asian American policies and legislative issues and budget issues. So this is a very critical moment for us, and I hope that we can continue to collaborate beyond just the task force, but creating joint public policy papers and legislative issues that we can all focus on collectively. Thank you all. Being purpose-driven is you don't have to go directly into politics and try to run for office to have an impact in politics and public service. My point is, if you want to be a lawyer, just don't go to law school, just become a lawyer, right? Just for the title. You should do whatever you can with that law degree to do something positive for the world and really transform your industry. That's the kind of purpose that everyone should be having. Go into medicine, become a doctor with a deeper purpose, not just to appease, I don't know how your parents or feel to go to church and feel validated that hey, I'm a doctor, and I'm this and that. But that would only get us to point B. And our first generation, we had to do that. My parents, we had to do that because we're new immigrants and we had to get to point B, right? But what I'm saying is for the next generation, whatever they're pursuing, provide and give them the opportunity to fail, give them the opportunity to try something and find something they find purposeful doing. And you could end up, in politics in many different ways. There are plenty of doctors who ran for office, plenty of lawyers, believe me, there are a lot of lawyers in politics. I'm not sure if the supervisor is an attorney. He's not okay. I know Ron's an attorney, right? He's a practicing attorney. But it's a good example. He's not just in it to make money. Like he's trying to use the law to serve, and find any kind of way to give back. And for me, what impacted me was seeing my parents struggle. When I came to this country at the age of 6, they ran a small business. I've seen them go up and down, and I was there in high school when they shut the small grocery store down and went through bankruptcy, and they didn't have a voice. Rent was going up 400%, and all these government agencies were targeting them because the landlord wanted to bully them out. Like I saw that as a young man, and I saw that they didn't have a voice in the system, and no one in the media or politics were giving people like my parents, small business owners, the voice. All we read in the New York Times, everything involves small business owners, immigrants, are when they're exploiting workers, or when you see Korean supermarket owners with guns in the LA riots shooting down at blacks and Hispanics. That is not what this community is about. We came here in the 70s, 80s, and 90s and transformed industries. We created, for example, nail salons that never existed in the way that exists now. You know, there used to be a grocery store, 4 or 5 grocery store every 3 blocks, you know, in Manhattan, and it never existed. It was so competitive, but they came here and they just woke up earlier and worked harder, worked 7 days a week with sheer will they thought that they could achieve. That is really the spirit of the American dream, right? The hope and belief that if you just work hard enough, you can be successful. But that narrative, that story never gets told. And that's why I think having a podium, having a soapbox in politics is important. Whenever I get a chance, and Mr. Kang knows, when I stand up in the assembly, I talk about my community, I give them that voice. I forgot to acknowledge our supervisor from Clifton here. Thank you for being here as well. You're not, how many terms have you served now, sir?
10.
10 years, wow.
Asian American represent 9% of New York State population. And if you look at, we have 213 legislators, and we only have 2 Asian American, you and Yu Ling. A couple weeks ago, we heard the State of State speech at the Chinese Community Center. And I remember the total state budget for 2018, $160 billion. How much of that total funding is allocated to address issues related to Asian American? Do you have any idea?
Yeah, unfortunately, we're not even there to give you that kind of data because there hasn't been an effort to break down the numbers. But I can tell you it's 0.00 something.
So 9% population get 0.00% of the budget.
Right.
That's what we have to really pay attention. That's my point is here.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. And to get a better sense, like adult literacy, ESL programs for adults, there are 3.5 million New Yorkers that need adult literacy to learn how to speak English as adults. So many new immigrants that come here, particularly many Asian Americans. We're serving maybe 4%, 5% of that demand as a state. So that kind of gives you a picture of the demand and what we're supplying as a state for this community. Every year we fight to add a couple more dollars to that, but it's not nearly enough to serve this community. That's just one example. I can go into healthcare and a number of different topics that we're being underserved.
Do you have a message for the group here having to do with the census coming up? What would be your message to the community in this room and what their role should be with the census?
Yes, that's actually a very important question. The census is the only way that we can secure enough funding for the next 10 years for our communities. And it also dictates the congressional and federal seats based on the census numbers. Last 2 times, we left behind billions of dollars that we should have received because we were undercounted as Asian Americans. So it is absolutely critical that we tell each other and get every person throughout the state of New York to be counted properly. Otherwise, we're telling the federal government to take the money that we deserve and put it elsewhere. The federal government is adding a couple of questions that may lead to intimidating immigrants. It doesn't matter whether you are where you have status or where you're a green card holder, citizen, documented, you have to be counted no matter what. And you won't be punished no matter what your status is, you have to be counted. As long as you step forward to be counted. But people, when they're asked, when the people come out, are you a citizen? They often shy away from answering that question if you're not a citizen, thinking they're gonna be targeted or punished, but they're not. And that's unfortunate because in communities like these, we have so many immigrants and these services. We're giving back in our taxes and we're doing our part, but we're not receiving the social programs that we deserve. And the one way to rectify that and fix that is through the census. So we need to make sure that we fill out the forms and be counted. As a state, we're trying to pass legislation to prepare for the next 3 years. There's pending legislation to allocate between $20 and $40 million every year to prepare as a state, to make the effort to go community to community to make sure everyone's counted.
I have one last one, 30 seconds. This is all to all the speakers, because it's one of the motivation why we do around the country. Because what Ron just said, the census, the data are so important for the legislator to use as ammunition. So I want to re-emphasize this. If you're not on the table, you will be on the menu. And nowadays, some of us already on the table. But you know what? You'll still be able only choose from the menu that are written by somebody else. And it is so important. I want to put that question, is like, I said that last year in DC, if you want to be fast, you fly alone. But if you want to go far, we need to learn how to fly together. And this is a question to Ron and all the speakers. I want to know how we could fly together and make this work, so we can all lift each other and go far. And so if you ask me, this is a motivation, and also it's a question, how could we be effectively, such as what you just talked about is so critical, be able to get those data to become in every way. Doesn't matter what profession you are, you can be a civically engaged citizen.
More commentary. Thank you. I think that's a good way to close this, this section. I know that Papa is playing more of an active role in the state region in upstate New York. For instance, many people in this room have attended the legislative annual caucus of Black and Hispanic Asian caucuses to make sure that people saw Asian Americans during that critical conference. But thanks to HP's leadership and executive board, every time there's an opportunity, we're communicating and we're engaging and we're growing, and that's the foundation that we need to put together. So thank you for sponsoring this event, and hopefully this means that it's going to sponsor more events in the future, right?
Thank you.